Hi everyone, so this is a video to replace our class on Wednesday. If you read the D2L post, I have to apologize one more time. I did sleep straight through my alarm. Doesn't usually happen, but occasionally things happen. So again, apologize for that. We're going to talk about a couple new things today. The only other thing that I'd remind you is if you have questions on the WordPress lab, if you'd like a little bit more time, I know I didn't have the opportunity to talk about it in class yet. So if you'd like more time, if you have problems, just send me an email. As long as there's some communication established, we can extend the due date without much issue. So moving forward, I want to talk a little bit about the ialab environment. I have a big VApp that I've been working on for some time now to deploy out to you guys so you can work on things that require a few more hosts. Specifically, we're going to talk about load balancing, and load balancing usually requires a couple of VMs. And instead of making you run all of those on your own environment, I'm giving you the opportunity to also run them on the ialab environment. If you want to run the VMs on your own environment, just note that in the lab documentation when you submit it. One thing moving into the ialab for grading that you should take into account is I may actually log into the ialab VMs and confirm that you completed the lab successfully. In that case, you should indicate which VMs you're actually running things from, which VMs you actually have the screenshots. One thing that you might not know is, as a faculty, I do have access to all the VMs anyway, so I can log in by default and take a look and see what is going on. And that just allows me a little bit more flexibility when it comes to grading. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Let's go into the ialab. If you haven't been there in a while, just remember the classes are at learn, so learn.ialab.us, and you just put in your DSU credentials and that will log you in. Hopefully this VApp will be provisioned out relatively soon by Kyle. I think everything is almost finished here. When you log in, what I like to do is I like to search for my VApps if I have a lot, so I could just say CIS 462, and you would see something kind of like this. I named my one incorrectly. And you would see all of these VMs here, and by default all of yours should be off. I have some of mine on right now because I'm configuring a couple of things. But yeah, so the very first thing that you should do when you log in here, just so the networking is right and everything, is power on your pfSense VM. So that will, if you're familiar with most of the ialab setups, that will NAT all of your traffic through that one pfSense VM, and it will only have one IP address on the vCloud internet. So it just helps things upstream with Kyle a little bit. But in order for all of the clients to get their IP addresses right and everything, you definitely should have the pfSense box powered on first. Otherwise, you might get those self-assigned IP addresses and things just get really painful. What I recommend is going over to this very last VM first, actually. So I had the window open already. So a lot of the things we'll do in the ialab will actually require internet access. We'll have to download packages, do various things. So when we're in the ialab, if you haven't noticed it yet, you actually have to accept the captive portal warning. So I recommend you go over to Xubuntu. You could also go to the Windows 7 VM too. I recommend that you go over to the Xubuntu VM and you open this web browser here, and then just navigate to a website. I always go to asdf.com, and what will actually happen is you will be redirected to captiveportal.ialab.dsu.edu, and you will receive a prompt where it will ask you to put in your credentials, type in your credentials, and then you'll be granted internet access. If, for instance, you're on a terminal somewhere and you're apt-getting installing your yum installing packages, and it says something like connection refused or something like that, it's because you have not accepted the captive portal yet. One way you could debug that from the command line is if you say curl and then uppercase I asdf.com, it would return a valid HTTP thing, but it would redirect you to that captive portal, and you can see that from the command line. And you could actually accept the captive portal and provide credentials from the command line too, but it's a bit more challenging. So I'd say usually just navigate over to one of these VMs that has a GUI and accept the captive portal warning. So those are really the basic things you need to know about this. A couple more things that I want to get into really quick briefly are the IP provisioning and SSH. So I'm just going to open a terminal up right here. Just going to if config. So right now we're on a 192.168.1 subnet /24. So all of our valid hosts are in here. I think our DHCP range starts at 100. But the actual servers right here, so Ubuntu 1 through 4 and CentOS 1 and 2, have static IPs, and I think those should be maintained throughout the cloning process. So if you actually do like an NS lookup, so we'll just do that and look up on Ubuntu 1, you can see you actually do get that Ubuntu 1 IP address right back here. So something that's helpful is you can just say SSH DSU at Ubuntu 1, and you'll actually be logged in right away. So one thing I've already done for you is I've deployed SSH keys to all of these Ubuntu boxes from this Xubuntu box. So if you go into the ialab, you go into your Xubuntu box right away, and you can actually SSH into all the boxes right away, no key prompts, nothing like that, and you can get right to work, and there's nothing that's going on there. So just a random interesting thing to note about SSH is if you actually leave off the user, so I just say SSH Ubuntu 1, it will actually take, oh, I'm already on Ubuntu 1, that's why. Okay, if I'm back on my Xubuntu box, so Xubuntu is slightly different than regular Ubuntu. It's a little bit lighter. It uses XFCE instead of Unity. I just like using it because it's a little bit lighter and less resource intensive. But getting back to our point about SSH, if you actually leave the username off of the SSH, so instead of saying DSU at Ubuntu 1, we just say Ubuntu 1, it assumes that we're using the same username on our current VM as the VM that we're trying to connect to. So we'll assume that we take DSU, and it's kind of an interesting property of SSH. So if for some reason you did forget to put that username on there, and you still happen to log in anyway, that's why that would happen. All right, so we noted that. Let's look at this. So let's figure out exactly how I'm doing this. So why exactly are we able to do this? Ubuntu 1. And we get this IP address, this 121. And that actually follows suit for all of the VMs. Ubuntu 1 through Ubuntu 4. We have Ubuntu 1 at 1, 2 at 2, 3 at 3, 4 at 4, and so on and so forth. So I actually configured that all in pfSense, and we might dig into a few of the options of pfSense a little bit later. So the default credentials of pfSense are just admin pfSense for the password. So I actually went into the DHCP server and added some static DHCP leases for all of these VMs. So when these VMs are starting up, they're actually querying this pfSense server for their IP address, and that's how they're getting it. And that's why I was telling you earlier, oh shoot, I just closed out that interface, that's going to be annoying. That's why I was telling you earlier to make sure you power on the pfSense VM first, so that the VM that you're using is getting the correct IP address. I'm just going to open that back up really quick. All right, so here we can see that's where we've provisioned all of our leases. And that's just kind of worth noting. We might get into pfSense a little bit more and how to configure some of these interesting settings. But just note that you can just SSH to, or even in the web browser, you could go to directly to Ubuntu 1. And you wouldn't necessarily have to remember the host name, or the IP that is, of that device. But they follow very straightforward conventions. As you can see, the one there goes to the one on the IP address and so on and so forth. And so all the Ubuntus are at 20s, all the CentOSs are at 10s. So that's just something to keep in mind. One other thing that I'd like to note is the VMware console is generally a pain and is just terrible. I do have a couple of scripts that I've developed that kind of fix that. It's a little bit hard to install, but you can see here, I have this console, my VM's full screen. One thing that's worth noting is like Control-C works good inside the terminal. And let's say I resize my window or whatever. Actually, the VM will resize to be that size. And it's just some nice functionality to have. If you're interested in that functionality, what you need to do is first install, if you're in Chrome, you need to install TamperMonkey. So you just search TamperMonkey. If you're in Firefox, you just install GreaseMonkey. It's very similar. You install this extension right here. And then I have my script posted over here. You go over to gist.github.com/GartnerA. So that's my username. You would go to the script, VMware Open Console, new tab. So it's a script that's gone through a number of revisions. Right now what it's doing is it's opening in this nice new console that was developed. And then what you would do is you'd click on this raw button. So again, you go to gist.github.com/GartnerA. You click on this first one right here, this VMware Open Console, new tab, and you hit raw. And you'll be prompted by either TamperMonkey or GreaseMonkey to install this script. Once you do that, you just hit install, you close out all these things, you reload this page, so you reload this page from scratch. You go back over to your VM, and you have this nice interface now. Now, one thing that's worth noting here is control or copy and paste now works. That's kind of something interesting, but it's a bit strange. So you would copy something. I'm copying something in the other window here. You'd click in the margin of the VM and you'd push Control V, and it would basically simulate the typing inside of the VM. So it's something nice if you're just trying to run commands and copy and paste commands. But there's nothing saying that you have to use this. And again, there's nothing saying that you have to use any of the V Cloud, the ialab stuff. If you don't want to, but it's definitely nice because otherwise you're going to be running, 4 VMs on your host, and that's definitely not something you want to be doing all the time. So yeah, we talked about the scripts, we talked about the host names and SSH. The final thing I want to talk about is taking snapshots. So along the lines, you might mess up your configuration. One thing you might want to do is take a snapshot before you start working on a VM. We're going to be using these VMs throughout the entire class, so you definitely want to create a snapshot if you are unsure that you're going to mess something up. Occasionally we'll have to actually uninstall services that we uninstalled for previous labs, so we can make room for new services on new labs. And that's multifaceted. We could reset this entire thing every single time, but that's kind of a common task that we might want to do in a server administration environment is remove old services and add new services. So we actually have some perhaps educational value in doing that. But if you're kind of scared that you're going to mess something up, if you don't really know what's going on, you can just create a snapshot. So you just click create snapshot. Ideally, you want to make sure the VM is off for the quickest and easiest snapshot, and then you just hit OK. That might take some time to do. Eventually, what you would do is you would click revert to snapshot, and you would be prompted for a dialog, and you would just reset that VM back to the previous configuration. So one thing, and that's pretty straightforward, and that would just reset it to the factory defaults. Highly recommend, again, doing that if you are unsure of what's going on or if you want to just experiment with things. But then when you end up breaking something, you can just revert it and it's just magically fixed again. But that's entirely up to you to do that. There's no snapshots by default in the labs or in this VApp. If you do run into problems, I can provision. I can just delete your old one. Well, I guess I can delete your old one and make you a new one. But it gets kind of annoying sometimes. These do take a while to deploy and make new. Please try and keep snapshots or just keep a record of what's going on your VM. Remember, if you're on, or should I already have that one open? If you're on your VM and you want to know what happened on it before, you can just look at the bash history. So just look there, look at the bash history, and you can see all the list of commands that were being executed on that VM. So long as you gracefully shut it down, One thing worth noting about the bash history, I love getting off on these tangents, but it's kind of interesting. One thing worth noting about the bash history is if your system just dies, if it kernel panics or something, the bash history isn't actually written out to the file. It's not written out until bash actually ends, until you actually close this terminal. So that's worth noting. So, what I'd like to do now is talk about load balancing with Nginx. So we had one day where we talked about Nginx briefly, about just serving files. We've had a day where we were talking about Apache. So I'd kind of like to combine those a little bit and talk about how we would use them to load balance. So remember, we're kind of building all of these things into this word balance load, this WordPress site. So if I go back over here, our ultimate plan is to do something like this. We're going to have the Ubuntu be the Nginx load balancer. We're going to have Ubuntu 2 and Ubuntu 3 running Apache, processing the PHP code, and then we're going to have Ubuntu 4 as our MySQL server. And that's the big thing that we're building up to. It's going to be a difficult lab, probably. And there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of things that we need to know. So for today, all I want to do is look at configuring Nginx on this first VM and configuring Apache to serve HTML on these two VMs. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over here. I'm going to SSH into all three VMs. So I'm going to say SSH DSU at Ubuntu 1. So we're into that one. Make a new tab. SSH Ubuntu 2. New tab. SSH Ubuntu 3. Alright, so let's just get started. We'll get our root prompt on all three as well. I'll just get a root prompt here and we'll come back to it. One thing worth noting is the credentials for all of these VMs should be username DSU, password should be password1 exclamation point, just like everything else. The only one that's different is the pfSense one, which the username is admin and the password is pfSense. So right now we are on Ubuntu 1, so this is going to be our Nginx box. And it looks like I messed up my host names. It should be saying add Ubuntu 2 right now, but it's not. I'll make sure that's updated. If we actually look at the IP address, if config, it does actually have 22, and it's actually supposed to be Ubuntu 2. So before the VApp actually gets deployed out, I'll make sure that gets fixed. It will be a little bit confusing right now, but this is definitely Ubuntu 1, Ubuntu 2, and Ubuntu 3. So on our one here, again, Nginx, Apache, Apache. So we'll just apt install Nginx. Go to our... okay. Let's see if we can actually get to the internet. I think this was resolved, this internet access issue. But I don't know for sure. Looks like the internet access issues might not have actually been resolved. Shoot. Oh, this is annoying. Well, what in the world? I think I might have, when I went to clone my VApp from my template that I was developing, yeah, I have these two options turned on. That's going to break things. Okay. Unfortunately, I just need a minute to fix things here. I need to go back over to my pfSense box, and I need to renew my IP address, I think. Oh, no, I do have an IP address there. It's 5041, interesting. Oh, it's the stupid fenced. I don't know how to turn that off. Ugh. Well, shoot. Yeah. Fenced. I need to check this checkbox, but I can't. Well, I guess this is going to end up being a short video. So this is what would end up happening in class anyway, as I would just not have been able to connect anything anyway. So I guess we'll push this back to Friday, and we'll talk about installing Nginx. We're going to do this basic load balancing setup on Friday, and maybe we'll actually talk about doing some WordPress 2 stuff too, and some more advanced routing stuff. So yeah, I guess that's all I have for you today. Again, let me know if you have any questions on the WordPress lab, or if you need additional time on it. All right, see ya.